I'm a
Did you?
fucking
Oh
wreck.
my god.
Wow.
Dude, what the fuck is this map? Dude? It's bigger too.
Oh my god.
Did you follow
Oh
me?
my god, team.
Hey guys, Cosmic here. So patch 0.21 has been out for some time now, and I've been collecting my thoughts about what I really think about it. I'm just letting it simmer as I try my best to play a large number of games and just get the fullest impression I can. Since I'm going to talk about several different topics, I'm going to break it out on timestamps and try something different, and just show you what topic I'm going to be talking about when on the left-hand side. So if you want to skip to any topic, or if you just want to see what's going to be covered, you can go ahead and do so and see that right there. So first thing first, we have the second anniversary event for the second anniversary of Armored Warfare, happening in NA and EU. For the event, you need to get 15 PvP wins in tiers 4 through 10 over a 72-hour period. It's not really that bad. The number of games you need to play is basically 15 divided by your win rate. So if you're an average player with 50% win rate, play 30 games, and you more or less will likely have it. If you need to play more, well then you'll need to play more. Overall, it's not really that bad to get the T62M premium tank as a reward. And as far as the T62 itself, I really think it's worth taking the time to get those wins. First of all, the skin genuinely, and non-sarcastically, really does look nice. It's gorgeous in my opinion, and of course, this is kind of a subjective thing versus an objective thing, but unlike the Fox skins, doesn't have a bugged low-resolution texture. Now, going back to the T62M, other than the skin, its acceleration, turret, and hull traverse are pretty abysmal, really. It's really low-tier MBT, and you could feel that it's a low-tier MBT. However, it has a redeeming feature which basically completely makes it worth it in my eyes, and that is its ATGMs. As a tier 4 MBT, it has heat ATGMs which have a whopping 600 millimeters of penetration. Let me say that again. 600 millimeters of penetration at tier 4. No other tank at that tier has that much penetration in an ATGM. You have to go up to tier 5 to the BMD2 to find a tank which has an ATGM with that much pen. Now what this means is that you could actually do damage even when you're up tiered against tier 6 tanks. Now, your average damage of 400, you're not going to do as much damage as that BMD2. So you really shouldn't expect to carry a game when you're up tiered. You can still be relevant. And so it's actually quite fun and fine even when you're up tiered, because you can still be very dangerous. Now it's possible this will be nerfed in the future patches, but as it stands, this is actually one of my favorite tier 4 MBTs. That really high pen makes it quite nice. Next up, there's been a new tier 6 premium added to the online store, the KBZ-70. Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this is the MBT-70. They're very similar looking. Visually, there's a few differences on the turret, front, geometry-wise. You'll also find the German Iron Cross decals on both sides of the turret. Clarify, these are actually decals and they do take up the first decal slot, so you can't change them. Just keep that in mind. And as far as visual differences, you'll also see this curious little X at the very rear of the tank. This is a West German version of the MBT-70, and I'm not going to get really much into the history of it, but what you really need to know as a player is that it's close to the MBT-70 with a few notable differences. Number 1, it does not get ATGMs. Instead, it gets high explosive rounds. Number 2, its traverse and top speeds are better. Effectively, it's a slightly more mobile MBT-70. And other than that, it's more or less the same. I did find that extra mobility a nice bonus, and I do enjoy it more than the MBT-70. However, that being said, I don't particularly enjoy the MBT-70 to begin with. If you're thinking about it, let me give you some advice. If you already have the MBT-70 and enjoy that tank, then I think there's a good chance you'll enjoy this tank. If you don't enjoy the MBT-70, I don't think the differences are great enough that you'd find it to be enjoyable, and I don't think it will change your mind. If you do not have an MBT-70 and are interested in this tank, I would actually recommend this over the MBT-70 unless you strongly prefer ATGMs in your MBTs. As far as premium MBTs at tier 6 are concerned, I kind of just prefer the XM1 over this, so honestly I wouldn't have bought this were I not a collector. That's just my 2 cents. Now, before I get into my thoughts about this patch, I wanted to address something which I have not talked about before, and that was my PTS videos. The balance changes in the PTS I played were different from the balance changes of 0.21 on the live server. That's kind of the nature of the test server, and I feel sorry if I haven't made that clear at the time. But I've been personally really disappointed because I feel like the ATDU was substantially nerfed from what I played on the PTS. I really enjoyed it on the PTS, and on live server, I think it's one of the worst tanks, or at least one of the worst MBTs right now. So, having played a few matches, I like to rate what I think are the most powerful tier 10 tanks, and what are the least powerful, and what are kind of some very situational ones. So first up, there's the T15. It's a bit of an awkward tank to play. Its ATGMs are slow to follow the target and slow to follow where you're aiming, especially in close ranges. So you actually have to lead where you're aiming if someone is moving close, or going ahead and moving around you. Otherwise, you will actually miss them. However, that 3,200 burst damage you could do in the span of basically 4 seconds with that 4 missile clip is utterly devastating. Nothing has a higher burst and a smaller time to kill potential in the game. For this reason, good players who can overcome some of the inherent awkwardness of this tank can be utterly devastating in this. It's just such a destructive force. If you see a T15 on your flank, chances are, by the time you see it, you're probably already dead. So it is definitely a priority target. Next up is the PLO-1. The PLO-1 with its 6-round clip can do an average of 3,000 damage, which puts it very close up to the T15. However, it does take about 2.7 seconds in between each shot, so it really slows down the duration of which that burst damage is done. But still, you do not want a PLO-1 flanking your butt, as it will go to town and it will remove you very quickly. Furthermore, the PLO-1 actually has basically more or less the same spotting potential as the Sphinx, so it is actually a very good scout. Now, it is a larger target than the Sphinx, and it doesn't have as good camo as the Sphinx, but its just burst capability and its damage capability is actually just better, just straight up. And so it is a very scary tank, especially in the hands of a good player, and it's extremely versatile. Next up comes the XM1A3. Now, the XM1A3 continues to be my favorite tank to play, with its 120mm ready rack, continuing to give very good versatility to players. And unlike the previous patch, your turret traverse is not uniquely terrible. However, it has had its speed reduced, and you do feel the difference. The biggest advantage of the XM1A3 in 0.21 is that it is one of the MBTs that actually still has a good lower front plate, which with some clever maneuvering can actually bounce shots still. Most of the other lower front plates of other MBTs are very fragile and very easy to pen. The decreased armor of sides of almost every MBT means that you can't really do too much maneuvering because they will just go ahead and pen your side. Finally, there's the Leo 2AX. Now, I think the 2AX is actually very good, and were it not for the fact that its lower front plate is very fragile when brawling, I'd actually put it up as high as the XM1A3. The penetration capability of the Leo 2AX's gun is phenomenal. That 900mm of penetration really does make a difference, and you could see shots that are much easier to make, which would have been just really hard in other tanks. So it is just a pleasure to drive, and one of the big plus sides of the Leopard is that its turret ring is very small and it's very hard to hit. So you can go ahead and get up in someone's face and face hug no issue, and they will have a lot of difficulty doing damage to you, while you'll be able to go ahead and pen their turret ring point blank again and again and again. Now, the next two tanks I'm going to talk about are very situational. First, there's the T14. The T14 is very different from the last patch. It is now the king of MBT speed, undisputed. It is by far the fastest MBT. It's got a good gun, which have great gunplay. It's got great pen, damage, and accuracy. And where it really shines is its reload. It is the DPM king of MBTs. However, the T14 is far more fragile than it's ever been. In some ways, it kind of plays like in a medium tank. Your enormous lower front plate is easy to pen, and even if you get into a face-hugging scenario, your turret ring is fairly easy to pen as well at point-blank range, so be very afraid of leopards who will face-hug you. However, if you could leverage your speed to get into positions faster than other tanks, then you could earn an advantage over your opponents. The T14's fast reload allows for it to do a lot of damage when flanking a side or a rear. However, it's spread out more in comparison to the higher alpha of the Leopard and the burst of the Abram. What this means is, if that you use the terrain to hide your weak points and control the flow of an engagement, you can actually outtrade the T14 in a Leopard or Armada. Your higher alpha or burst will put you at a hit point advantage quickly, while you will hide waiting for your reload to happen, while they're just waiting for you to pop out again. Thus, the T14 really needs to make use of that speed to flank, and if you make use of it, it can easily be one of the best NBTs. However, if you fail to do so, or the opposing team prevents you from flanking, you'll find yourself really wishing that you were in a different tank. Next up, there's the Sphinx. Now, the Sphinx is the dedicated scout of tier 10. It does well with one of the highest view range. However, the PLO-1 actually has about the same spotting distance. The Sphinx does have one advantage though, its superior camouflage, but it's only better by 14%. And if you're on a map that you don't really need to win the vision game, or one where the vision game isn't really at long distances, but closer, then the Sphinx really isn't going to shine that much. And you're basically sacrificing an enormous potential damage in comparison to the PLO-1. Now, if you're on a map which does have large open areas, then you'll probably be better served in the Sphinx. And it's not to say that a great player can't make the Sphinx work and be very effective on these kinds of maps. It's just an average player in a PLO-1 can easily outshine the Sphinx in terms of damage for your team. In a great player's hands, the PLO-1 also has a lot of utility, while also having the spotting capability. In a competitive setting with predetermined teams and team coordination, you most likely prefer the Sphinx for scouting, but otherwise, I think it just needs a little bit more damage potential to overcome that deficit in basically flexibility and the power that the PLO-1 offers. Anyhow, now with those two out of the way, it's time to talk about the big losers of the patch. The tanks, which are unfortunately just not very good. We start with the ATDU, and again, I was very disappointed with how the ATDU ended up being on live server for patch 0.21. It just feels a lot worse than it did in PTS. And one of the things that really keeps it back is its gun handling. It's just awful in comparison to every other tank. The 140 packs a punch, but if you can't reasonably bring it onto bear onto another opponent, there's not really much point to it. Furthermore, each non-damaging hit that you dish out due to the inaccuracy of your gun just sets you back further when trading with opponents. And your armor, while mighty, still can be penned frontally through the driver's hatch, or the lower front plate if you have sufficient amount of penetration, such as in a Leopard. Given all the disadvantages that have been given to the ATDU, it's really disappointing that the armor and gun just failed to make up for it. Furthermore, I've observed something rather funny. The ATDU is very difficult to pen from long distance. Its own inaccuracy, though, also limits its effectiveness at distance. But that seems to be the place where it can stay alive the most. So it kind of ends up being a little bit irrelevant on the battlefield compared to more dangerous targets which you should be prioritizing. So it just doesn't seem to have a great place right now. And, well, finally, and quite disappointingly, following the pack, we have the new Tier 10 tank destroyer, the Vilk. The problem with the Vilk is that it's supposed to be a sniper, but its camo is just not good enough for that role. Thus it's forced to relocate. However, the moment you move in the Vilk, your aim circle becomes enormous, making you unable to effectively engage anything. So the moment you're being chased down, you really can only stand your ground or run, but you can't really run and gun. Thus the PLO-1 is kind of just better in every way. I think one of the problems about this patch is that the PLO-1 kind of just outshines both the Scout and the TD of Tier 10. And yeah, it's just it's a better jack of all trades there than these dedicated tanks. So there really isn't a point to go with the Vilk if you could go with a PLO-1. Now I think to address this, a camo buff would really go a long way in making the Vilk a lot more survivable and a lot better. But as always, those are just my impressions of high tier balance. Now one of the largest changes in patch 0.21 was the ammo changes. Heat, once again, does more damage, sides have been made significantly weaker, and autocannons can actually pen the sides and rears of tanks again. This has been both good and bad. AFVs, TDs, and LTs are significantly more fun to play. They're no longer outspotted by MVTs, and they're able to provide meaningful support and be actually really devastating on the battlefield. Autocannons, yet again, can be potent and scary at close ranges. You're actually able to get some exciting knife fights against MBTs. I think this is great, and I think it really improves the game. The MBT is no longer the undisputed king of the battlefield. Once again, it's contested, and it's up to the players and their skills to determine who gets to sit on the proverbial Iron Throne. However, the way this has been implemented has some downsides to the depth of gameplay, in my opinion. Specifically, I believe the current size of the lower front plate, the weakness of their side armors frontally at acute angles, along with the significant reduction in size of turret rings, has led to a reduction of interesting interactions MBTs can do. Let me explain. Back in 0.20, the size of frontal weak points, turret rings, were such that it was reasonable to hit them. Would it be difficult and it would require skill to hit them in motion? What this would encourage is for MBT players to try to be in motion as much as possible, even when they're trying to stand in one place. Thus, in order to move, they would go ahead and do a bit of a defensive dance of sorts, traversing their holes left and right, moving them back and forth, in order to try to reduce the chance of their opponent striking a hit. Now, this isn't necessarily something that one would consider realistic. Armored Warfare isn't exactly a simulator. It's an arcade game which tries to find a good balance between realism and good gameplay. So why is being able to do a little defensive dance good gameplay? Well, in my opinion, let me just summarize this in short. It increases player interaction. Let me explain through a hypothetical. Two MBTs meet at close range with no real terrain or objects to hide behind. They're in the same tank, but one has 700 less health than the other. Both players are reasonably equal skilled, then the one with more HP is likely going to win. But what if one player was better than the other? What if the player with less health plays better than the other? Well, if the weak points are too big, there's precious little that the player can do to not lose. But what if the weak points are such that when the tank is stationary, it isn't too hard to hit, but when it's moving around and traversing the hull and turret, it is more difficult to hit? This way you can incentivize two different interactions. First, now that the lower health player has an action that they can do in order to defend, they can actually do something. They can do something specific to go ahead and give themselves a better chance of winning. And the attacking player also has something that they can do. They can contract the player. They can reduce the mobility of the other player. Now, it shouldn't be impossible to pen the player when he's doing a dance like this, but it should just require a little bit more skill and a little bit more patience and timing in order to get that hit. Next up, there's the issue of turret rings. Turret rings are extremely difficult to hit if you're not face-hugging in 0.21. This means that it's almost a bad decision to try to hit the turret ring if you have a chance to hit the side or lower front plate. I think the turret rings should be slightly larger such that it isn't easy, but it should be something that's reasonable to do. It shouldn't be a bad decision to try to go for it. And this is important because it adds another possible interaction when brawling. You can go for a skill shot and make it harder for the attacking player to be able to shoot you and pen you by breaking their turret ring. However, and this is important, it isn't impossible then for the other player to pen you if they lost their turret ring. In fact, if that player is good, they can go ahead and counter by traversing their hull and still aim the gun up and down. Thus, they have an action that they can do to counter that play that you've done. Now, you might be thinking, well, sure, okay, these are all nice and good, Cosmic, but there's this little thing called terrain that you could use to your advantage. And that's true. You can use terrain to go and make good decisions on the map in order to get an advantage over another player which might have more health. That's exactly what a weaker MBT must do in that kind of case. The problem is, if the terrain is the only option, then first of all, you go ahead and really make the matchup be based off of how well that map is balanced for terrain, and you increase the risk of the classic chest-high wall syndrome of a lot of really boring third-person shooter. As a gameplay feature, it isn't bad to have terrain which you can use to defend yourself. But if that is the only thing that you are relying on, if you are over-reliant on it, then gameplay becomes monotonous. Thus, you should allow for a good mix of areas with cover and areas without. So, in my opinion, in order to improve interaction in brawling, I think the weak points should be slightly reduced frontally. And I think the frontal side armor should be a little bit strengthened, just so that you need a larger angle to penetrate a tank from the front. Now, to be clear, I do not want sides to be overly strong, such that lighter vehicles cannot pen them from a broadside. I just want them to be unable to ever so slightly traverse their hull and get penned because they're at like a 10-20 degree angle. Anyhow, this video has been going on for long enough, so I'd like to try to wrap this up. I've got one thing that I'd like to ask of you guys, though. I like to do a video on the state of maps and global operations. In order to do this, though, I'd really appreciate if all of you guys can go down below and do a quick survey and rate how much you like each global operations map. I have a theory that I like to test, but I really need your feedback first. As I said, the link is down below in the description. I really would appreciate if you take a minute of your time just to rate each map. Anyhow, so what are your thoughts on .21? The new tanks, brawling in general? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, if you liked this video, you know what to do. If you disliked it, you also know what to do. And if you'd like to see more, hit that subscribe button. See all of you guys next time.